everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Nut. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, what are we talking about tonight?
Tonight's subject.
Spoilers for movies?
No.
Spoilers for books?
Well, maybe a spoiler for some movies, but Take This Job and Shove It by the immortal Johnny Paycheck.
Yeah. Okay.
Today's subject is the so-called, in air quotes, work ethic. What is it? What did it used to be? What is it now? Does it exist? Is it dead? Do we have any reason to revive it? But before we get into work, I'm going to get into a little pleasure.
Okay.
What are you drinking?
Oh, I have a nearly invisible glass of wine. This is a
skeletal glass
appropriate for the season. This is an Apothic White. It's a white wine blend.
Okay.
And just a very pleasant everyday sort of wine that went well with the poke bowls we were having for dinner. So
an everyday sort of wine for the everyday night. That's
everyday night. Exactly. And what are you drinking?
I've got a bourbon. It's called New Riff bourbon, straight bourbon whiskey. It's 100 proof. And so I've cut it with just a little splash of, it's a ginger beer, a non-alcoholic ginger beer. And I can't remember the name of it. I've recommended it before. It's a tree, something tree.
Fever Tree?
Fever Tree, yes.
Yeah, we've got some of that. It's quite tasty.
Yeah. And it's very nice for the season. It's a nice little spicy, bitey ginger flavor. And it works well with a bourbon. So cheers.
Cheers.
So,
yes,
the work ethic. We have what used to be referred to as the Christian work ethic. And that work ethic
until you die, because you'll get your reward in heaven.
That's
right.
And
so know your place here on earth.
Right. Never complain. Do your best. Always give more than is asked of you.
Be grateful for the pittance that you get from the people who are exploiting your labor for their own profit.
Exactly. And boy, were we sold that. And that was, I suspect, would have been the general consensus of what parents told their children right up until the 80s, maybe 70s, certainly the 50s and 60s. That was what you were taught as a kid was do your best. And, we've both talked about the concept of loyalty to an employer.
And in fact, there was your lighting has suddenly changed.
Yeah, I closed something on my screen here, my very large screen. So it was white, and now it's washed. Now I was a little washed out before, and now I'm looking a little bit too tan.
Yes. A colleague many years ago said to me that he thought of being in a company's employ as being in fealty to that employer, and therefore it was disloyal to look for another job and I said, no. Fealty, first of all, it's a misunderstanding of fealty, and it's a misunderstanding of modern employment. Fealty was a two-way contract,
right? And
employers used.
It was a two-way contract, but it was kind of one-sided.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
But between nobles, because the peasants didn't have a contract of fealty; they had their labor to an overlord, a feudal lord. But I said, so it's a misunderstanding of it, the way you're applying it, but also the idea of fealty there used to be an idea of an implied employment for life.
Yes.
You got a job, you worked there for 40 years, you got your gold watch, and you retired, and you got a pension.
Yeah.
There's no pensions. Employers don't have loyalty to their employees. They will discard you if they think it's in their best interest. I'm not talking about all employers, but I'm talking generally, because the idea that was sold to the public, the Milton Friedman idea was sold to the public, that a company's only purpose is shareholder benefit,
Right.
and any other consideration was wrong, was
Yeah.
and
Counter to that.
right. And
therefore
that's
bad.
actually an economist a few years ago got a Nobel Prize in some ways for contradicting that. But employers believed that, and so they would talk a good game, but one of the first things that employers would do when trying to increase profits was cut the labor force.
Sure.
And
Still to this day,
still,
and automation is now the.
Yes, but I have also seen companies. I had a gig with a company that lasted about 8 or 9 months, and about a week into it, I knew the company was doomed, because they'd brought on a turnaround specialist who was not trying to turn the company around. He was trying to decrease costs, to boost profits, to sell the company.
Right.
And so what he was doing is, and I've seen this in other companies, they cut staff, which decreases customer satisfaction, which decreases profits. So they cut more staff, and it's this downward death spiral that a lot of companies go into. And so I said, no, I told my colleague and friend, I said, I disagree with you. That's a misunderstanding of both fealty and the current employment situation. You don't have a contract with this people.
Right.
You are an at-will employee. They can let you go at any time.
For any reason.
Or no reason.
Right. The only difference is that depending on the reason, you can apply for your unemployment benefit.
Yes, which they often fight. So
yes, and that's, at least in Michigan, it's hard to fight. You actually have to have a cause. You have to I mean, short of stealing from the company or assaulting another employee, you can pretty much get an unemployment. Or, I mean, not showing up, certainly, if you're fired for non-compliance with rules or not showing up for work, whatever. Yeah, you can be fired and not get your unemployment. But if you're just let go to reduce staff, you're absolutely eligible.
Yep.
I had I've told this story to a lot of people. I was in a situation where they hired me away from another company. And I gave 2 weeks notice to my employer, just like you were used to be supposed to do. Now you get marched out, you get frog marched out of the building with someone watching you collect things that are in your desk. So
they expect you to give 2 weeks notice, but they won't give you 2 weeks notice. They might give you severance.
They don't even give you an hour's notice.
Right.
A lot of companies now, you're here, come into the office. This gentleman is going to escort you to your desk where you will empty it and leave the premises. So
that same employer that I knew was doomed did the HR guy came to my office and said, that's it. You're leaving. You have to leave now. I said, I'm going to go say goodbye to my staff who I have worked with and who've depended on me. And you can try to stop me, but
unless you're going to physically eject me from the building.
Yeah. And he did not want to try to do that. I said, I'm not going to sabotage anything. This company is fucking doomed anyway. I'm just going to say goodbye. And so I went and said goodbye to my staff and collected my things, which conveniently was already in a box because I was anticipating things. So
well, this company I was at, they hired me away, and they wanted to pay me the same amount of money that I was already making. and it was like a 20-minute drive instead of a 2-minute drive.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to at least compensate me for my additional gas for this time. And so they, okay. And it was supposed to be a probationary rate for my first 90 days, because what they wanted to do is hire me in, they said, to head up a new department, as they were on the cusp of expanding.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to head their art department. So eventually, as the department grew and I got people under me, I would be getting more pay as a manager and so on. I said, oh, okay, this is a great opportunity. That was not going to happen where I was. So they hired me in there. And then at the end of the 90 days, there's a whole other thing about whether I told them when I started that I was going to be taking a vacation, because that was when our Penzic War
Mm-hmm.
thing was right at the end of that 90 days. But just before I went on vacation, my boss went on vacation, who was doing sales. They hired me in as a designer, right? And then this other, one of the owners was the, in any other term, account executive for all of their sales. So she handed me all the jobs that she was working on and went on her 1 week vacation. And I, took up the slack. I talked to customers. I took in or I sent them proofs. They sent the changes. I made, I made contact with them and figured it out. And when she came back, I had all of the jobs that were in process laid out on her desk in order, priority order. And she looked at the desk and she looked at me and she said, I think I'm just going to let you keep doing that. And I said, well, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And she was puzzled. What do you mean you don't want to do that? I mean, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a salesperson. You hired me as a designer. That's what I'm going to do. And she went, well, we'll have to talk about that. I don't know that we really have to talk about much, because I'm not going to do it. And I went back to my desk and it went around and around, and eventually it got to a point. I said, well, okay, I can do it, but let's talk about additional compensation. This was not part of the deal when you hired me. And they didn't want to talk about that. So the manager at that time that they had hired in was talking to me about this whole situation. And we went back and forth. He had to leave the room where they were waiting in another room. They didn't want to talk to me directly, apparently, until this was settled. So he was leaving and coming back and leaving and passing messages back and forth, until finally he said, well, they don't want to talk about additional compensation. And so I'm looking across the desk and I'm like, so what does that mean, Mark? I said, I'm not going to quit. And he said, well, then I guess we're going to let you go. Okay, thanks. And I got up and I went to my desk and I gathered all my stuff and I said, sayonara suckers. And I was out the door and I drove from there directly to the unemployment office. So yeah,
and that's a violation of, if you will, an understood contract of employment. Here's the job you're being hired to do. And if it's a misrepresentation, it's the old idea of the work ethic is you do whatever you're asked and you do it without complaining. You do it to your best of your ability. And I think that people undervalued their own labor and their own expertise and their own professionalism.
Trained to.
Yes.
Trained to undervalue your labor.
So first of all, in terms of virtues, there's honesty, which is I consider a foundational virtues for a lot of them. You have to understand, and we talked about this in the concept of humility. Humility is not false modesty. It is having, and it's not braggadocio, obviously. It's having an honest, there comes the honesty part,
right? Honest
self-assessment of your strengths, your weaknesses, and your value, your worth, and as both as a employee, as a person, all of that.
Sure.
And if we're taught not to value that, we're taught not to be honest with ourselves, taught not to be the correct meaning of humility, then if you, what was it? What's the saying? You won't stand
If you don't have something to stand for, you'll
or
fall for
fall for
anything.
anything. Exactly. And I've seen employers gaslight people, and they've tried to gaslight me before too. And
Oh, sure.
I had I at one company, one agency I worked for did a lot of incentive programs. So the idea was, certain incentives are offered, say, to salespeople, sell more of a particular kind of thing, you can earn rewards, merchandise, travel, so on. And I had to go to a mandatory presentation by the incentive expert of the large
Okay.
agency, and
I'm a pretty
handed
good
out,
expert. I'm a pretty good expert at what incentivizes me.
well, but he handed out his book on the subject, which I read, and it was pretty good. But his presentation, in the first part of his presentation, he contradicted the book, his own pamphlet on it, and the company's stance on it. He maintained that people only do what they do for the extrinsic rewards they get. They only do what they do because of compensation or rewards or that sort of thing. So at the break, I went up to him and I said, well, what about people who are driven intrinsically to do the best they can, to exceed their previous performance, to excel at what they're doing, and have that drive to do that? And he looked at me and said, what is it you do for the company again? I said, I'm an art director. I was an art director at the time. And he went, oh, you're a creative. You're not like real people. And I said, oh man, you not only, I didn't say this to him, not only because I was so stunned by it, not only contradicted his own the official line, but misunderstood people, because companies with modern governance that empower people, treat them with respect, empower them to do their best, have loyal employees, are higher performing companies. There's a company several years ago, the owner of the company said, I'm going to pay, based on studies that he's read, a lot of studies, $70,000 salary is the point at which people don't worry about money.
Oh, I know who, I can't remember the name.
And so
who you're talking
he
about.
said he reduced.
He looks like a guy who works in a car wash.
He looks, yeah, but he's the CEO, and it's like an IT services company, and and he reduced his own salary, and every one of his employees got a $70,000 salary. And people, this is all over the news, people said, you're crazy. You're crazy. Well, he said it's the right thing to do. His company is now 10 times the size it was.
Yep.
It's prospered. It's done very well. His employees work hard because salary is a form of respect for someone's labor and expertise. It's not the only form of it. I've seen way too many companies say, well, we treat our employees with respect. We have a pizza party once a quarter. It's like, you fuck your pizza party, pay people what they're worth, give them the time off they need. And I had this discussion when I was in grad school in a course called Ethics, Regulation, and Society. And I had,
so it's regulating ethics.
No, it was
Ethics,
about
regulation.
Ethics, regulation, and society.
Okay.
And one of the discussion questions, and this was several years ago, was, well, say you're at work and you need to use, is it unethical to use your employer's phone to make a personal call during business hours? And
unethical?
The rest of my cohort, who were, I had at least 20 years more work experience, professional experience, probably more than that, than most of my cohort, said, oh yeah, you shouldn't do that. I said, well, wait a minute. companies expect you, professional organizations, certainly advertising, marketing, that's the area, the discipline, they expect you to work until the work's done, because you can never miss a deadline. If there's work to be done, you pull all-nighters, you work weekends. But the flip side of that is, if there's no work, you can take time off. But it's also work-life balance means these days work-life integration, in that, yeah, if you need to take 10 minutes to make a personal phone call to, and then you can put that out of your mind and you can go on with the rest of the day. You need to take an hour off to,
Go to the drugstore,
go
pick up
to
a
something.
prescription. Yeah.
That's fine, because you're already putting in the time. And if your employer doesn't trust you to put in the time, they should find a different employee, or you should find a different employer. Now, keep in mind, this was before the widespread use of cell phones.
Yeah.
But even so, that would be considered still a valid discussion question, to be considered you're stealing your employer's time if you do it during their time. Well, what that attitude by employers does is it creates a time clock mentality. I punch in on time and I punch out on time, and I don't care if it's due the next day. I'm not putting in any overtime because you're not paying me for that. Well, that limits the agency's or company's productivity. It undercuts the quality of the work, because people aren't putting in the extra, they're putting in just what needs to be done. So
I have a little different take on that, where if a company is willing to promise something in too short a time frame that requires you to put your own life on hold so that you can work late nights and you can work on weekends and you can suspend whatever plans you might have had, that is disrespectful on the face of it.
yes,
So I've been hourly, I've been salaried and I've been hourly, and I prefer hourly because it's more honest. There's no expectation that I'm going to get paid when I'm not there. And there's no expectation for me to come in if I'm not getting paid.
I understand that. I feel the opposite way, because a salaried situation lets me be, if the employer is correct or a good employer and has good policies, lets me be flexible with my time in ways that hourly doesn't, because I've also worked hourly and salaried, and there's a significant difference. And there was one agency I worked at, well, several of them, that didn't understand that people have different biological clocks, different times, different rhythms of the day. And a lot of times I would find that during the day, I was putting out fires, helping people, supervising work stuff. But if I had my own work, other work, and that's work, but my own design work, creative work, writing work, anything to do, I had to wait until people left to have any time to do it, or come in really early to do it. But since some of the problem children were there early, I usually got more stuff done later.
But see, that's the thing, that my experience in salaried is that, well,
again, they promise things on a schedule without consulting the people who actually had to do the work, and that's disrespectful. The traditional work ethic would say, it's not your call, you just do the work, you don't complain, I think the other part of the work ethic story used to be an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. And that contract, that implied contract, was broken a long time ago.
Or, well, I don't know if it was broken, but it was drawn up fraudulently, in the first place. And I had this conversation once when I was asking for a raise. It'd been like 3 years since I'd had a raise at a company I was at, and I sat down with my boss and said, okay, it's time to talk about raise. Cost of living's constantly going up and my ability to meet that cost is not. So, and he was like, well, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure I can do it. I don't know where I'm going. I'm not sure. I said, I've seen our prices go up and I know that that's not all materials. So, first question is, am I worth more to you now than I was 2 years ago? And I had to ask him that directly.
Mhm.
Said, am I more efficient? Do I do better work? Can I, and I knew what I was talking about, that I could anticipate things now that I couldn't 2 years ago and have them done more efficiently and, more easily within the time frame and all that stuff. So I knew what I was asking for. And he's like, well, yeah, but that just is a way of maximizing profit so that eventually the company grows and you like, okay, stop. This company isn't growing. This company hasn't grown in the 5 years I've been here. You've not added one single employee. So I don't feel like your goal is to grow the company. I feel like your goal is to siphon as much money out of the company as possible before you sell it or retire or whatever. I said, here's the deal. And I think this is true whether you're salaried or hourly. So in the capitalist system, as we've been shown, the employer and the employee are at a kind of an adversarial relationship, in that my role as the employee is to get as much money as I can possibly get and for as little work as I can possibly do. Your job is the opposite as an employer, is to pay me as little as possible and get as much work out of me as you can. Now, somewhere that's the truth. And somewhere we compromise, somewhere we decide this is how much work I will do for this amount of compensation. And you, and as the employer, agree, okay, this is the amount of compensation I will give for this amount of work. And we agree.
And I would argue that's a correct description of an employee-employer adversarial relationship that exists in way too many companies. However, it's been shown that companies that have a clear vision of where they're going, clear mission, and want their employees and empower their employees to be part of that mission and contribute to that mission, do better. You said that company wasn't growing and it wasn't his intention to grow. And one of the reasons for that is because of that, I'm going to get as much as I can, that relationship you described. That is ultimately an accurate description of the traditional, it's not of the traditional work ethic. The traditional work ethic would say, I do as much work as I can, and and the rewards will come to me either in this life or the hereafter, right?
Yeah.
What you're describing, though, is an accurate description of the way too many companies are run, but it's not an accurate description of the way very successful modern companies are run that empower their employees to do their best work. What I have wanted at a minimum from bosses I've worked for is to give me the resources I need to do the best job I can and then get the hell out of my way.
Well,
and that's what I wanted. Occasionally, I've had bosses, very occasionally, because I've worked for a lot of shitty companies over the years. Occasionally, I've had bosses who would give me more than that. They'd give me more than just what I need. I'd say, hey, I need this to do this thing. I need this thing. And here's a way we can make this better and stuff. But I've been told at times when I look at things and say, we can make this better. We can do this process better. We can do this more efficiently. We can serve the client better. We can do this thing better. It'll benefit the company. It'll benefit the client, it'll benefit, everybody will win. I've been told to stay in my lane.
Yep.
I've been told, I wrote a memo. I think I mentioned this.
Yeah, the memo last time you mentioned
the memo, the job that I knew was going to go tits up really bad. And I wrote a memo about it. And the person who was responsible came to me and said, clutching the memo and shaking, "What's this about?" I said, well, the project as described raised a lot of red flags that concerned me. I didn't think it would be in the company's best interest, the agency's best interest, to take on this job unless we addressed those red flags first. And the person said, "That's not your job to do this." I said, well, nobody else was doing it. So I believe I had a responsibility to the agency as my employer and to the client, because I want to do the best work for both. And
there's another aspect.
That person is a performance expert now,
Of course,
by the way.
of course.
So, yeah.
There's another aspect of this that I hear oftentimes thrown around when you're not working hard enough, or when you are the squeaky wheel because something can be done better, or you can't do your job to the best of your ability because you're having to do some other stupid thing that doesn't need to be done, or somebody else should actually be doing, or whatever. But it's being a team player. And being on a team, if you've ever been on a team, everybody trying to do everybody's job at the same time is the worst possible team ever. Everybody on a team should have a position. Play your position. And that's fine. I mean, if we use baseball as an analogy, for instance, I mean, anybody can catch a fly ball, and you see outfielders backing each other up. But if it goes to left field, it's the left fielder's job to catch that ball.
But they back each other up, and that's the important part.
But as the second baseman, I'm not out there catching flies for the left fielder and the center fielder and the right fielder and playing third base, because I can't play second as well if I have to do all those things too.
Yes. So a complex work project requires a lot of individual expertise and a team where people work well together. And one of my goals was always to do my part in a way that made it easier for the next person to do their part as well. So if I was working on copy, I'd do some proofreading. Editing wasn't my job, but I would point out when there were errors so that the proofreader could flag those as well. Proofreader and copy editor could flag those. I'd say, I think this is a problem. Here's a suggestion. I'd make it easier for them because it pops up for me. Typos, bad kerning, all that stuff are like, it's like you like Spidey's sense, where you see that it's for me. Oh, look over there, that third building from the left, a quarter mile away, their sign is in papyrus and it's kerned badly too. Yeah.
And I get the same kind of a thing where, well, at work, I get a job from whoever took the sales job, and you lay it out, and if there's it's got a paragraph of text that I have to type in. There may be, or 6 phone numbers or something on it, and I got one digit wrong. I get finished doing the layout. I hand it back to the account person. It usually goes to the customer for proof. And then it comes back, I produce it. If it's approved, I produce it, and then it goes to a production person who assembles it and puts it together. Now, if I'm at some point, I'm the only person who ever looked at the design spec for all of those phone numbers, because it'll go, if it gets all the way to production, and my position has been, if it gets all the way to production with a wrong phone number, I'm not the sole responsible person
Right.
for that being wrong. And yet everybody looks at me, well, how could you do that? I don't know. Y'all did the same thing.
Yeah.
How did you miss that? You know, am I the only one responsible for making sure it's right? You know, the
Yeah,
customer approved it.
I found a typo, an error in my book after, you know, after more than 6 months back and forth with a professional copy editor.
Yep.
And both of us are looking at every single word. I found a little error, but that happens, you know.
Yeah.
But I think the other aspect of the traditional work ethic is accepting blame that's not yours. And people would do that, employees. I think there's a difference. And one of the reasons I disagree with you about the hourly versus salaried is there's a level of what's considered a professional level is salaried generally. And I think that's a mistake, because in a lot of ways, because it undervalues people who are hourly, and sometimes overvalues people who are salaried as professionals. Professionalism means somebody who cares about their work and does it to the best of their ability.
Right.
So that's really caring about your work and doing it to the best of your ability is a valid work ethic. People who are salaried generally are considered to take that approach, but it's not always true. And people who are hourly are not necessarily considered professional. And that's a mistake too, because damn, you know, if we have a plumbing issue, I'm calling a professional plumber. I am not trying to do that stuff myself, because I don't know anything about it.
Right.
But then their truck pulls up and I go, that logo is just sucks, you know.
Did you pay somebody to do that to your truck? Oh my God.
No, it's probably a family member. So,
well,
but there are things, levels of expertise that people don't value. But I'd say the real work ethic is you always want to do the work to the best of your ability, and you bring all your skills and knowledge to bear on that. And that's difficult as a professional when you find that your employer or clients ignore your professional advice.
Oh yeah.
And decide to go with the bullshit anyway. Hence the one rule in one of the rules in my book that I deemed Ratting's law, because I'd never heard anybody say it before.
All right.
Is that given that clients will pick, I'm paraphrasing my own rule, clients will pick the worst of the three options presented to them.
Yep.
Yes. Of course,
they'll pick the one that's closest to their original idea, even if their original idea sucked.
Well, yeah, yeah. And so one of the things I came up with, my own professional ethic, was give the client what they ask for, but also show them what they need and explain why. Because clients will sometimes say, we need you to do this thing to fix this problem. And what they are asking you to do won't fix the problem they think they have. And the problem they think they have is not the problem they actually have.
Well, yeah.
So it's important to say, okay, here's the thing you asked for, but and so this is why I say work ethic is, I think of it as professional ethic or professional ethics. My professional ethical responsibility is to say, not here's the thing you asked for, but here's what your problem really is, and here's how to really solve it. And then I have discharged my ethical responsibility as a professional. If
Right.
the client decides to go with some bullshit anyway, that's on them. It's not on
Yes.
me. And
Yes.
and getting to that point where I wouldn't belabor the point that no, I can't fix everything. I can't
Right.
fix I can only offer people a solution. If they decide not to take it, that's on them, but I've discharged my responsibility.
And I think you were starting to touch on, we should probably wrap up pretty soon, but I wanted to point out that you're absolutely correct that a modern work ethic is to do your best within the confines of your job. You should always be trying to do your best work, but you don't have to convert your life into work for your employer, is the point.
Yeah. And in fact, that's counterproductive to doing your best work, because
Yeah.
if you are putting in the kind of focused work that doing excellent work requires, you need a break. Or as Captain Kirk said on the near the conclusion of the episode, where they were on the recreation planet that they didn't realize was at first, he said, the more sophisticated the mind, the greater the need for the simplicity of play.
Mm-hmm. And
or I should have delivered it like Shatner. The more sophisticated the mind, the greater.
But the point there to me is another aspect, both as designers, work is an ebb and flow kind of thing. If you're working on one thing, it takes you a couple of minutes to extricate your mind from that thing and then burrow into this new thing. So you're peaking and valleying all day as far as your concentration goes.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're having to do multiple things at once, because all of these things have to be finished right at this point, it can be extremely tough. And you do need a break every once in a while, and you need some time to transition between jobs.
Yeah. I have explained to students before, is students think they're multitaskers. No. So multitasking is a fiction. There is sequential single tasking, where you're shifting your attention from one thing to the other. And every time you do that, there's a ramp down, ramp up. It's like, being on say you've got to go 20 miles. If you do it on a highway in, say, 5-mile increments versus you do it completely on surface streets where you have to stop every block, you have to slow down, stop, start up again, go, accelerate, stop. You will get there quicker and more efficiently in less time with taking the highway.
Sure.
And so intensely focusing on something to the exclusion of everything else is valuable. Unfortunately, some employers, it's one of the hyper focus, which is a manifestation of ADD, is also hyper focus. If you're really interested in something,
that's a nested autism.
Employers love that dysfunction where people hyper focus on things because they get so much done. They're so productive. So,
right, but they can only do one thing at a time.
Generally, and things that don't interest them tend to not get done.
Right.
Yeah. So,
let us try and draw this to some sort of a conclusion for.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned fortitude, which is another virtue.
Fortitude, yeah, it is, and working hard.
Courage to stand up for yourself when you're in a dysfunctional employer situation because they have an outdated notion of what the correct relationship between an employer and employee should be, based on an old outdated idea of what the work ethic is, rather than treating you like a professional with respect and appropriate compensation, requires courage to stand up for yourself,
or to leave the situation for your own good.
Yes.
So yeah, but so we both agree that there is a place for a modern work ethic within the virtues, that doing your best when asked to do a task, you give all of your attention and you do your best in that task.
Yes. I would say another aspect is my concept of franchise, which is the ability and obligation to take positive action when you see that something needs to be done. It's often translated as noble bearing, or that's how way people interpret it, but I put that under sprezzatura, of course. But that concept of franchise, the franchise, as it became known, which is also interpreted as the right to vote, it means that you have the ability to take positive action for good, and therefore you have the responsibility to do so. I think that's also an example of a modern professional work ethic, that you see something is going wrong, or you see that there's a problem that can be avoided, or you see that something can be fixed, or you see that something can be corrected, or you see a way something can be done better. Because you see it, you have an obligation to say something, to do something, to fix it, to make it better.
Right. Now your employer can beat that out of you if you're, but then you've got to, then we're back to courage again, and fortitude of, do you want to be constantly doing this? Because if you're not empowered to do that, if you aren't allowed to make your environment better, you're hurting yourself too.
Yes.
So
one of the things I wrote about, one problem I wrote about in my book, I call the soul killer problem. If you get to a point with an employer or any situation where you find that you are self-censoring, that is your best ideas, self-censoring your best ideas. So say you have an idea and you pitch it, and they say, no, we don't want to hear it. The client won't want to hear it. And you do it again and again. And you find you're at a point where you stop sharing those ideas because they won't go anywhere. That's really risky. And if you find you get to a point where you stop having those ideas, it may be too late. You have to get out. You have to get out of that situation, because if you're not allowed to practice your profession to the best of your ability, you're not allowed to practice the modern work ethic, and to do that in a way that's in keeping with the virtues, the chivalric virtues.
Exactly. So I don't know that we've answered every single question. If you have questions, please write them to us, put them in comments, put them up on our website.
Share, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your family's friends,
tell your employer.
Yeah. Show them this.
Yeah, show them this. See what they think.
Yeah.
See if they see themselves anywhere in this. So that'll be it for this time. We will see you next time, couple of weeks. Don't know what the topic will be next time. We haven't got into that, but we'll have it figured out by then, I suspect.
I think we will.
So until then, be thou
a good night
and true.